Okay. Well, hello, welcome. I'm Nakia Shade, also known as Nakia Shade through my author imprint and on my YouTube channel. And today I'm talking about Song of Wata, which is my web drama. It's a serialized web novel and an audio drama. It's geared more towards like older teens, and so today I'm gonna explain my process and what inspired the work and tell you a little bit more about me. I am a America's Next Get Out There semi-finalist 2022 and a Dark Horse Comics author and artist. Actually, I authored and illustrated this comic for kids for PGE's Project Zero initiative. You can check that out. Very cool. I have that for purchase, and I also have like really cool greeting cards for purchase also, and have some collage stuff. We'll be doing collage class later today. And so I was responsible for writing the Climate Keepers comic, and I actually did a lot of like, the storyboarding and the character design. Caitlin, Caitlin White is the final illustrator, so she does the final artwork. But I did all like the storyboarding and the writing and everything like that. It's a really fun adventure. Kids really enjoy it, and I'm happy to sign at the end of the presentation. So, what is Song of Wata? That's the question. Well, Song of Wata is about two Mami Wata mermaid sisters who are sold at an auction by the human side of their family. So they're Mami Wata and human. And so one of them becomes a griot, which is Sela, or Niambe. Niambe becomes a griot. She's like a living library, a teller of tales. She is a storyteller. She's somebody that knows the story of Kari, the city, and she's able to like predict the future a little bit and the past. And then there's Sela. Sela, or Sela becomes a pirate. She is adopted by Captain Barbarossa. He's one of the fearsome pirates that rules the Pacific, and she becomes this really feared pirate in her own right. And she trains sirens who are kind of like assassins in a way, but they're not Mommy Wad. They're just like human women that are just really smart. And so it's currently a web novel and an audiobook. And the goal for Song of Wata is to have it as a comic, web comic, a published printed comic, and then having the web novel and the audio novel as well for people. So the story is set in Cowrie, Cascadia, which is based on Oregon and Washington. It's kind of just a culmination of the Pacific Northwest region, and the reason for that is I really love it here. I love all the nature that's here. I really like how we have the mountains this way, the coast this way. We have the desert and the dunes, and then we just have tons of wetlands and nature, and we have the Columbia River and the waterfalls. And so, in the narrative research for this work, I was like, oh, it would be really cool if I set a story in this region because I'd never heard of mermaids in the winter or mermaids that are in a non-tropical environment. So, and it got me to think more about using the region as a character. Some of the major conflicts within Mami Wata, or in the Song of Wata, are like family betrayal. The sisters end up getting separated by the human aunt out of revenge. So we deal with those sort of things. Environmental collapse and conservation, because you can imagine the entire Pacific coast flooded with oil, which is one of the main conflicts, is the Barbarossa brothers are the first to strike black gold, which is another older term for petroleum oil. and mythical in the region, and that creates a whole environmental collapse. So that's another one of the bigger themes here is how do we conserve our environment and how do we do our best to preserve it for the next generation. We also deal with like reclaiming identity. In the story, the different antagonists and even the protagonists themselves are at odds with what it means to be a Mami Wata because there's all these stories about who they are from the past and in the present. And so it's like, how do we navigate that and how do we represent ourselves the best way we can, despite things that happened in the past? And so that's a big part of Niambe and Sela's character arcs is how can they just be themselves, but also serve their people because they're the founding daughters of Kaori. How can they continue on the legacy that their father and mother made, but still just be themselves in a way, navigate that. The other thing that's probably different than most of the mermaid tales is the commodification of the Mami Wata, which I'll go into a little bit in the next few minutes. But basically, another point of conflict in the story is that the Mami Wata are seen as products and goods and services. So they used to be worshipped and they used to have like rituals and altars and things like that in the story. But as the time went on in the story, they had to adapt and decide what was going to happen. So it's navigating change and progress and understanding that how do they get out of that cycle. So what inspired the story? I already mentioned the Oregon coast, just Oregon itself as one of the characters. There's also a lot of river cultures that are based in the Pacific Northwest that I drew a lot of inspiration from. Obviously, my mixed heritage, African American and South Asian diaspora experiences was another big inspiration for the story. And so I'll go into a little bit about one of the Oregon-based inspirations. There is the legend of Multnomah Falls, and in it, it's a indigenous Oregon tale, and it explains a woman who sacrificed herself to save her people. And so that tale for me influences a lot of Sela and Niambe's like sense of duty, even though they're not connected to like where their mother's side is from. That still impacts a lot of what their sense of duty is in story, as well as how they navigate their internal struggles, but then also like the antagonists that are in the way. Do they decide to be selfish and like just forget about all these things, or do they decide to take on that responsibility and help their city and other Mami Wata that are there? The other tale that is local to Oregon is the Willamette Valley Horse Serpent, and this sort of, again, another like, indigenous needed tale. For me, that inspired, I think, just knowing that serpents are so common in African and Native culture, it was cool to know that that was something that was vocal and that I could incorporate that into the Mami Wata like mythos, like my mythos. I've heard a lot about like the Ouroboros, the snake that eats itself. So that was another sort of snake themed myth that I wanted to incorporate. Like, what if Oregon just had this really big snake, this big serpent that was just here? And it's always been here in the Willamette Valley, and that's it. And that's why the Mangwana came here, because yeah, they already have access to this area. So let's talk about the mythical framework. Many West African cultures have aquatic deities and spirits associated with rivers, oceans, and lakes. These spirits are often served as guardians of wealth and beauty, fertility, and transformation. They can be benevolent or vengeful, depending on how they're treated, which reflects balance and reciprocity with nature. And so that's the thing with the Song of Wata is the characters feel like human, which is a way of me saying they have the capacity for benevolence or vengeance. And that's the whole point of the story is despite the challenges that Sela and Niambe go through, is peace or revenge going to solve the problem with Kaori, with their family, with themselves, with the environment? Like, is that going to solve the problem? And so there's no like black and white, it's all gray area, but it's them making choices and understanding like the consequences that define how, if things are going to get better or not. And so that's what I really like about Mami Wata. And what I really like about like African water spirits is like we really understand like duality and it's not just like good or bad. Like these things exist in nature and so we understand why that's important in storytelling and how people are. So who is Mami Wata? Mami Wata is a revered and African water spirit whose worship spans West Central and even parts of East Africa and like the Diaspora here in Oregon. She is often depicted as a mermaid or a beautiful woman with serpent companions. Similar to how I designed Niambe and Sela, they're just pretty woman, or they have the mermaid look, and they also have their serpent companions. And in my version, they can even turn into their serpent companions, so they kind of use what we wear. They symbolize duality, danger, abundance, seduction, and destruction, as well as freedom and activity. And they're associated with healing, wealth, beauty, and spiritual initiation. So, with that said, the role of divine feminine and mermaid core, what role is that? Well, in Song of Wata, Mami Wata mythology anchors the sisters' powers and choices. Nyambe's griot training connects her to ancestral knowledge and oral tradition. In the first chapter of the audio and the web novel, Nyambe's entire opening story is that she's explaining the history of the city and her parents and her family all through oral tradition with drums and with puppets and she's explaining it for kids, so she's making it less terrible, but it's still engaging. So that's a big part of this story and how with Nyande, like her words are like power and her words influence. Another part of the divine feminine and mermaid lore is Sila's relationship to Steve and her becoming a part in training sirens. It mirrors like reclaiming agency and taking responsibility, as well as, using what you have to your advantage and kind of going through if you're stuck in a challenge. Like women are very creative by nature, so understanding that with Ciela in particular, she just goes beyond survival. It's more like, okay, how do I live like this? How do I live like a pirate? How do I become something that I want to be? What do I have to do to become? So mermaids in the story, despite having the commodification aspect, they're spiritual rebels and divine avatars and cultural birds, the goddesses. They are so many things, and it's based on the individual choices that each of them makes that defines like where they're going to be in the story. So that takes me to building a speculative world. How I designed Calorie and the floating casinos and floating pirate city. I really like thinking about Cowrie as the region from Portland Metro all the way up to like Kansas, Washington, but it's connected with the bridges. And so I felt like with Cowrie, I really wanted to create a city that was like diverse and that was just beautiful and grand. I think when I think of fairy tales, I always think about like the old school folk tales like growing up that I would read that were just really beautiful. Like the snow, it escapes me. But Red Rose and Snow White and Kay Nelson's art, those sort of stories, those sort of fairy tales really inspired me a lot. was creating this like really cool culture and architecture, and even what the architecture looked based in Oregon as a lot of Victorian, Italian, Art Nouveau, just like very like European. And I think for people that like are new to like kind of how my style of storytelling is, I love to blend different cultures together to make something that feels like lived in and new. And so I wanted to keep a lot of the Oregon architecture in the story, which is a lot of the locations are based on these areas in Portland and Vancouver and things like that. The older style buildings, as well as the more modern style. And when it comes to blending the geography with the folk tales, again, like the Willamette River and the Columbia River Gorge are like huge inspiration in how the sisters navigate the terrain, because that river runs through the entire upper part of the state and it connects to Washington also. So I really wanted that to be like a central place where a lot of the arcs in the story take place, whether it's the end of the first act, the second, third, fourth, they always come back to that river, which is where the serpent lives, the big serpent along the valley. And the visual language and architecture, yeah, we already kind of talked about that. A lot of the visual language is based on like me being mixed and like how you can combine different influences to make something new. So like with Niambe, she likes to wear kaftans, but then Sela likes to wear more like blouses and pants and like not that Niambe doesn't wear pants, but she wears a different style. And Sela likes to wear like kimonos and just like other cultural things that are a mixture. So visually designing these characters to be like different down to like the clothes that they wear, colors is really important to me to show like what influences them as they get older. Because when they get Rosito in particular, she's like in her late teens when the story begins, and then she's in her early 20s throughout the whole story. And Yande is like in her late 20s and in her early 30s throughout the rest of the story. So it just shows how like their style matures and refines and how they're influenced by their environment. Going back to the tale of the the legend of Oklahoma Falls, like the sacrifice that gal made in that tale shapes the way in parallel to how Niambe and Sela make sacrifices. In the story, I say the sea remembers every betrayal and every kindness. So the water, even itself, is a character, and it reacts to how the sisters interact with the humans and the other Mami Wata and the environment. It will help them depending on how they treat it. And I'll go to the themes. And the character arcs, a lot of the themes and the character arcs in the story really relate around mental health, different types of addiction, the sibling rivalry, sisterhood, survival, also like low self-esteem and low self-love, low self-worth. I think that was really important for me to address that in this story because I feel like those are really overlooked in the tales that I've read to create this tale. That's something that's not there, and I wanted to add that in there because I wanted to show that the biggest thing for the story for me is like no one's coming to save you. You know what I mean? Like in the second chapter, Niambe like gets wise real quick, and she's like, okay, now I gotta figure this out. And that's what I really wanted to share in this tale is like, are you gonna just like sit and wait for someone to help you, or are you gonna like figure it out? And it doesn't sound as like fantastical and like, oh, there's a fairy godmother. Like that's just not the kind of tales that I grew up with, and that's just not the kind of tales I want to write. I want to write stories where the characters have agency and they're like responsible, and that they have these responsibilities, and they can choose to not have a responsibility and give it to somebody else, but then they can't complain when everything gets worse. So the whole point is them being responsible and agency and understanding storytelling and how storytelling and myth and memory and shapes everything. I'll go through my creative process really quickly. I have like maybe 10 minutes left. The reason that Song of Wata is serialized is because I've been writing serialized fiction for like 10 years, and it's what I'm most familiar with. I really like when I create a story. I always think about the characters and the setting first, and then from the characters and the settings, I decide what kind of conflict to go off of. A lot of the times when I create a story, I just kind of think, okay, what if this was a folk tale that I liked? What if it was like this instead? Or if there's a situation or something that I read in like the news or a historical thing, like what if I combine this with that? That would be interesting. A lot of the tools that I use, obviously, I use things like bookmarkers. I use paper for the art, washi tape for the art. In terms of like technical stuff, I use like Canva. I use like Audacity. There's another one that I just started using that I really like called Ocean Audio, which is really nice. And I use things for when I record it. I use like Zoom. I use a lot of low tech stuff, and I use a lot of stuff that is just easy to use like on the fly in different environments. I try not to have like a super bougie setup unless I'm like recording like in my studio. Then it's like more curated. But when I'm on the go, I just get everything I have. I use a MacBook. I use an iPad. I use a Blue Yeti mic. I have like a really cool mic that I use when I have like a big audience. Then I can project my voice across the room instead of really loud. And the timeline for this whole story, it's been about 22, 23, 24, 25, it's been 4 years. But this is the year that it's launched. So my narrative research usually takes me about a year or two, depending on like what it is, like how intricate I want things to go. But Song of Water, it took a bit more because I was combining things in a way that I wanted people to just like access, and it took me a bit of like being creative in how to present it in a way that I felt was authentic to the source material, but then also it's like, okay, how do we retell this Mami Wata folktale for an audience that's never heard of it before? But then also, how do we like create something that's just like unique to the environment where it's set? That was a fun challenge to have. Serialized. Yeah, I chose the serialized format because it's easier for me to do. It's something I'm really familiar with. It's something that's really popular. People can read it all over the world. I have readers from Germany to Brazil to Canada to the States. I have readers everywhere. They're all able to access the story on their phones or their desktops. Let me take 1 second to get a charger. I'll be right back. Okay, we're back. So, China, it's just easier, and I don't have to think about like inventory until after the volume one is done, and then I get pre-orders for paperbacks and hardcovers and all that fun stuff. I like iterative processes for creativity. I like being able to update things and provide like a really curated experience and with serialized web novels and audio dramas and comics, and it's pretty low tech for the most part. It's pretty cool. Reading Stories offers me a really great platform that I can share my stories with people all over the world, and I can create memberships out of that, which I think is incredible because people want more content and they want to be a part of a fandom and a community, and they want proximity to the authors, and Moon Stories provides that. YouTube offers me like just this way to connect with people all over the world for free and allows me to build my brand and build trust with my audience and my fans in a way that I don't think I could do without it. Like Instagram's great. Instagram's fun to use locally. There's something about YouTube that I'm really grateful to be able to use that platform for my work. But memberships, like I mentioned, will directly support the comics production. I've mentioned this in other YouTube videos that creating a comic takes a lot more time than just writing prose or recording audio. It's a combination of things, and so I really know that with the memberships for Song of Wata on Stories and YouTube, that I'm able to provide my readers with a really nice experience, really quality experience, but then they also get to see the story in three different phases. And I think for me, as somebody that writes like Masala fiction and has always been drawn to multimedia experiences, like it's cool to know that the jump from ebook to audio drama to webcomic to like published like traditionally published comic is just like memberships and YouTube. Like that's it. That's the jump. And it takes time to build that, but it's a lot of fun. I'll get through these three things and then we're almost finished. So character design wise, I'll share some first. Oh, okay. This was a really early concept of Niambe's design. So, like her final design, as you can see, is a little different in terms of her face shape and certain facial characteristics. But her outfit is still something that I really want to implement later on in the story. And Sela's design has stayed, I want to say, pretty consistent throughout the entire iterative process. She's always had blue hair. She's always looked really cute and like a baddie. So I've always wanted her to like have a certain aesthetic anyway. So her design's pretty much stayed the same. Her hair she's gotten longer and she's gotten more angular to kind of show like her environment shaped her. So I'll share some strategies and then yeah. So when you're blending folktale and history and your personal narrative, choose cultural elements that serve the emotional arc of the characters. For instance, the folktales that I chose that were local to Oregon parallel and enhance the character arcs of the protagonist. So you want to choose source materials that can amplify what the core theme, the golden theme of the story is. What you heard of Golden Theme by Brian McDonald. Basically, it's we're all the same. That's it. So everything that I write goes back to the golden theme. So choose inspiration that serves the character's struggles, their arcs, the narrative. You can use real myths and then adapt them, creating fictional rituals and legends that reflect your world, like with my story, with the Mami uh, there's like a ritual that the denizens perform every summer on the coast and offerings to the Mami Wata for like harvest and abundance and wealth and stuff like that. You can ground fantastical elements in your lived experiences. You don't have to go trauma dump on your readers. You can just take aspects of your personal journey, what you learned, where you were, what you learned, what you do different, and what you tell somebody in that same experience, and then just package that up as character arc or as a main theme. In my case, when I intertwine timelines with oral storytelling, because nowadays a griot, that works to my advantage. I can tell the past, present, and the future at the same time, and it allows the readers to kind of have like a plot anchoring into the plot and having like not Easter eggs, but foreshadowing, so that they're able to kind of be like, oh, okay, is this gonna happen? Is this real? It almost makes Niambe an unreliable narrator in a way because we don't really know what's gonna happen or not. And then blending memory and folk tales together. You can use folk tales as like a metaphor, or you can literally just talk about how you want to take care of the environment. I like the environment. A lot of the work that I do in the storytelling is just like in my own personal interests, revolve around nature and conservation, birding. So these are all things important to me. So that's another way you can do that. And another thing is that I think is really cool is like write what you want to write, but be clear on what you're going to offer your readers. I think a lot of times, especially for new writers and new creatives, we just want to give the whole thing. We just want to like create something. It's like, oh, I just want to make this thing, and I don't really care. But I think when you're writing for an audience, you're not writing for yourself anymore. You're writing for people that want to be in the same experience as you, and so that takes a bit of thinking and like, how do I tell this thing that I want to tell and make it what I want to make it, but make it clear. And so it's just like a logical steps and processes. And then an activity that I have for you all is, what myth or story shaped you growing up? What sort of story that you were told growing up, or folk tales, or fairy tales, or even just family stories? What were those stories, and what shaped you growing up? And then all the links to what I'm doing today are in the description below, and have a coloring book that you can check out. I have my link to the first chapter on the YouTube, Miriam Stories link, and I'll go with it. Alright, so thank you very much for joining me on the presentation, and I'll catch you in the next video. May partying be your guiding star.